but it is one that is necessary, as this is a hot topic in our culture. And there's a handout. You might notice that the paper feels a little heavy. That's because this is such a heavy topic. No, I know, it's a bad joke. There were some ladies working with the copier, and I didn't realize they had loaded it with heavier gauge paper. So when I went to make copies, I got better quality paper. So you're getting the good stuff tonight. Well, we'll get yellow next week. If I counted right, we've got 2 more Wednesdays after tonight. So are there any hot topics you'd like to discuss that we've not touched on yet? Anybody have anything you want to bring up? And if you don't want to just holler it out right now, you can mention it to me later. We'll have the hot topic of a very loud microphone. Okay.
I have a friend that their family's not Christian at all.
Okay. That's probably the best thing to say. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, we might be able to talk about suicide. That's not a bad topic. Sure. I know a lot of people do it. They don't need any help at all. And assisted's one thing, but suicide is a whole topic altogether. We might just tackle that next week. Everybody got a handout that wants one or have access to look at one? I made 35 copies. I'm not sure if that's enough. Okay, all right. Johnny's making a couple of more. And most of the material on here is material that I garnered off of the internet, and I tried to give, rather than me just reading it and rewriting it myself, I just copied and pasted and tried to give credit where I could for the places where I got it. So just looking at the top of the first page, around 1,915 abortions take place daily. That means today in the United States, statistically, there were 1,915 abortions. Now, that's based on statistics from the year 2012. And 2012, as I understand it, the numbers went down from 2011. However, let's say that's cut in half for today. Let's say that today it's 50%. So that would be 900 and some abortions took place today. I think one's too many. That's my opinion. The methods are as follows, and these are not pleasant. The RU-486 method. It's a drug that produces an abortion. It's taken after the mother misses her period. It can be used up to the 2nd month of pregnancy, and it works by blocking progesterone, a crucial hormone during pregnancy. Without progesterone, the uterine lining does not provide food, fluid, and oxygen to the tiny developing baby. The baby cannot survive. A second drug is then given that stimulates the uterus to contract, and the baby is expelled. So you're essentially starving the baby inside the mother and then forcing it out. Women who abort with the drug RU-486 experience nausea, severe cramping, vomiting, and bleeding. Resulting emotional distress may have even more impact. Rather than being over with in a few minutes, as in a surgical abortion, this abortion could last for over a week. And then when the woman finally does abort, she will expel a tiny dead human being or baby. Let me also say, I probably should have said this before we even started. It may be that there's somebody here who has had an abortion or has been associated with an abortion. That doesn't mean that your life is over and that you're going straight to hell, as a lot of people might say. No matter what anybody does in life, God forgives when we repent. And all of us have some sin of which we need to repent, and when we repent, God forgives. I would hate for that little thing to happen that happens on cartoons sometimes, where there's a little thing over your head and it's filled with your thoughts, and everybody can look at that little, what's that called anyway? There's a name for those. They can see a bubble. They see your thoughts in that bubble. I'm glad that doesn't happen in real life. But at any rate, if we were all to think about the things we have done that we are ashamed of and we'd like to be forgiven of, those could appear up there and everybody would see, well, yours are just as bad as mine, and mine are just as bad as yours. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and look at the rest of these. Suction aspiration, the second method listed here. In this method, the cervical muscle ring must be paralyzed and stretched open. The abortionist then inserts a hollow plastic tube with a knife-like edge into the uterus. The suction tears the baby's body into pieces. The placenta is cut from the uterine wall and everything is sucked into a bottle. Number 3, dilation and curettage, the DNC. This is similar to a suction procedure, except a curette, a loop-shaped steel knife, is inserted into the uterus. The baby and placenta are cut into pieces and scraped out into a basin. Bleeding is usually very heavy with this method. Number 4, dilation and evacuation, a D&E. This type of abortion is done after the 3rd month of pregnancy. The cervix must be dilated before the abortion. Usually, laminaria sticks are inserted into the cervix. These are made of sterilized seaweed that is compressed into thin sticks. When inserted, they absorb moisture and expand, thus enlarging the cervix. A pliers-like instrument is inserted through the cervix into the uterus. The abortionist then seizes a leg, arm, or other part of the baby, and with a twisting motion, tears it from the body. This continues until only the head remains. Finally, the skull is crushed and pulled out. The nurse must then reassemble the body parts to be sure that all of them were removed. Number 5, the prostaglandin abortion. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but prostaglandin is a hormone that induces labor. The baby usually dies from the trauma of the delivery. However, if the baby is old enough, it will be born alive. This is called a complication. To prevent this, some abortionists use ultrasound to guide them as they inject a feticide, a drug that kills the fetus, into the unborn baby's heart. They then administer prostaglandin and a dead baby is delivered. This type of abortion is used in mid and late-term pregnancies. Does this not sound like the stuff of a science fiction horror movie? That's exactly what it sounds like to me. I don't know how many of you have read of the experiments that were done by both the Germans and the Japanese on prisoners during World War II, but they were horrific. Probably the ones that get the most press were the Germans, who would take human skin and make items like purses and lampshades. How would you like to have a lampshade made out of human skin? It's just horrific what human beings can do to one another, and we look at those things and we call them war crimes. The Japanese injected prisoners with different kinds of chemicals just to see how the people would respond. The Germans would break bones, and once the bone had healed, they would break it again, and they would continue to do that process until they realized how long they could break a bone before it wouldn't heal anymore. It's unbelievable. This is the same kind of stuff, in my estimation, as what the Germans and the Japanese did. And this is happening to the tune of almost 2,000 a day, statistically, in our nation. Yes? That would, of course, be covered if the unborn baby was considered a human being. And then you would be incidentally, that's what the Germans did with the Jews. They referred to the Jews, the Jewish bodies, I believe the word was Schmatten, dolls. They weren't allowed to be called human beings. And once you dehumanize someone, and it's interesting what happened also in this country, because you can do the same thing without even realizing what you're doing. You think you're working for a good cause, but in the depictions, in war posters made in America, the Japanese, how were the Japanese shown? Slant-eyed, great big thick glasses, buck teeth. What does that do to your image of the other human being? Okay, they're inferior to us, they're less human, and that's what the Japanese and the Germans were doing with regard to us. The Japanese were superior to us. We were mongrels as far as Hitler was concerned. All the American people were mongrels. We weren't Aryan like them. Incidentally, Hitler was not Aryan either, but nobody wants to bring that up. And that's what happens when we dehumanize one another. And, okay, let's bring it down to another level. What happens in pornography? In pornography, the exact same thing happens. Human beings are dehumanized, and they become an object for someone's pleasure or someone's use. That's what happens in pornography. There's a lot of this going on. This is kind of in your face, but the rest of it's essentially coming from the same root. Yes.
Pulled out because he was out of his zone of flying, and the pilot made it all the way to England with the front end of his plane shot up and everything. He landed that plane, and they went over and put the kibosh on, you don't say nothing about this nice German. After the war, they met this nice German, and he said, I was in Africa Corps, and I had a colonel, and he said, if I ever find out that you shot a pilot in a parachute, he says, I will personally shoot you. And this pilot says, that's the same thing that guy trying to get home. But one side depersonalizes the other will not personalize the other, like you said.
It's all a matter of respecting one another as human beings. That German pilot also wrote that he lived in fear until the end of the war, afraid that he would be found out, that he let that German... Well, but he was afraid that he would be found out, for what I read. You read one thing, I read another, but... number 6, dilation and extraction, a DNX. This abortion is also used on mid and late term babies from 4 to 9 months gestation. Imagine that. Ultrasound is used to identify how the unborn baby is facing in the womb. and the abortionist inserts forceps through the cervical canal into the uterus and grasps one of the baby's legs, positioning the baby feet first, face down in the breech position. The child's body is then pulled out of the birth canal except for the head, which is too large to pass through the cervix. The baby is alive, probably kicking and flailing his legs and arms. The abortionist hooks his fingers over the baby's shoulders, holding the woman's cervix away from the baby's neck, and he then jams blunt-tipped surgical scissors into the base of the skull and spreads the tips apart to enlarge the wound. A suction catheter is inserted into the baby's skull, and the brain is sucked out. The skull collapses, and the baby's head passes easily through the cervix. Who comes up with this stuff? And I'm not making this stuff up, and the people that wrote this aren't making it up. This for years has been known to be a legitimate method of abortion. Who has abortions? This information is from the gutmarker.org fact sheet. 12% of U.S. abortion patients in 2014 were teenagers. Those aged 18 to 19 accounted for 8% of all abortions. Incidentally, the first statistics I looked at were from the year 2000. There were far more teenagers in 2000 than there were in 2014. The number of 20-year-olds or 20-somethings having abortions is the age range that grew in the later years. Those aged 18 to 19 accounted for 8% of all abortions, 15 to 17-year-olds for 3%, and teenagers younger than 15 for 0.2%. More than what's that? Okay. More than half of all abortion patients in 2014 were in their 20s. Patients aged 20 to 24 obtained 34% of all abortions, and patients aged 25 to 29 obtained 27%. The reason I think this is significant is because when you've got young girls, you can imagine the trauma of a very young teenage girl becoming pregnant. Not to justify anything, but it makes sense that some people would think, okay, let's not have this baby for whatever reason. But when you get to be in your 20s, you're an adult. You know what's going on. You know what the ramifications are if you're having sex with someone. As far as I know, that's still the only way you can get pregnant. It's denied. You can have what kind of sex? You can have safe sex. What is safe sex? The only safe sex I know about is that which takes place between a husband and wife that are married to each other. That's the only safe sex that there is. The next bullet point, white patients accounted for 39% of abortion procedures in 2014. Blacks for 28%. Hispanics for 25%, and patients of other races and ethnicities for 9%. In 2010, statistics show U.S. population to be 64% white, 12% black, 16% Hispanic, and 8% others. So the statistics for abortions are out of kilter with the statistics for racial variance in our population. If you look at it, and I bring this up because if you look at the statistics for blacks, it's 28%, but what percent of our population are black? 12%. So more than twice as many abortions are taking place with black children. This is why I've said to other people, if Black Lives Matter, go to these places where the abortions are taking place and talk to these young women and talk them out of having an abortion. Talk them into letting you adopt their children. Find some way to stop this killing of human beings, black or white.
Mom used to work with an Indian girl. That was her joy in life, is to bring in the baby and give it away. She offered to give mom the baby. Mom never took it.
There's all kinds of viewpoints in the world, but there's a narrow way that leads to life, and that's what we're looking for. 17% of abortion patients in 2014 identified as mainland Protestant. 13% as evangelical Protestant, and 24% as Catholic. So we're not talking about non-religious people. We're talking about people who are, by and large, making the claim that they are religious. 38%, that's all that reported no religious affiliation. In 2014, some 46% of all abortion patients had never married and were not cohabiting. Well, what does that mean for the morality of our nation, for our practices? That means that people are sleeping around. I didn't put the statistic in here, but abortions that involve rape, anybody know the percentage? It's about 1%, about 1%. How about abortions that involve the health of the mother? Less than 1%. So when you're having this discussion and people want to throw that out and try to make you look like an idiot because you're arguing for something that's against a poor woman who's been raped or a lady who has her life endangered by her pregnancy. Well, in the first place, if you talk to most women who are pregnant, they're not going to abort their baby just because they think their health is threatened. They want to go ahead and have the baby regardless. And with rape, just because a child is conceived through rape is no reason that that child needs to die. It's still a child. It's still a human being. I know there's a lot of things we could discuss about that, but the bottom line is human life is sacred. That's what God said he hated. In the last bullet point on that page, 59% of abortions in 2014 were obtained by patients who had had at least one previous birth. 49% of abortion patients in 2014 had incomes of less than 100% of the federal poverty level, and that's $11,670 for a single adult with no children. 26% of abortion patients in 2014 had incomes of 100 to 199% of the federal poverty level. What does that mean? What does that statistic mean? Okay, so they had double the amount that they would have needed to keep them out of the poverty level, and they still had the abortion. So money is not always apparently the problem. The reasons patients give for having an abortion underscore their understanding of the responsibilities of parenthood and family life. Read this carefully with me. The reasons patients gave for having an abortion underscored their understanding of the responsibilities of parenthood and family life. The three most common reasons, each cited by 3/4 of patients, were concern for or responsibility to other individuals. The inability to afford a child, and the belief that having a baby would interfere with work, school, or the ability to care for dependents. Half said they did not want to be a single parent or were having problems with their husband or partner. Anything you see in there that jumps out at you? Babies are an inconvenience, and there's an inherent selfishness. What is having this child going to mean to me? Now, it sounds like a joke, but what if some parent said, I'm sick and tired of dealing with this 13-year-old that thinks they're the good Lord's gift to this planet. I'm going to abort them. Think of all the money you'd save. If they backtalked mom and dad, that's what the law said. Man. Isn't that interesting? I am the last person in the world to say that bringing up children is easy. It is a challenge. When you become a parent, you'd better get the idea in your head that that's what you are. Everything else in life is secondary to the fact that you're a parent. If you don't have that outlook, you're probably going to have more trouble than you would have ever expected. That doesn't mean that making your children happy is your top priority. It's not about your children being happy. What is it about? It's about instilling godly faith in your children. It's about raising your children in the way that they should go, which is in the way of the Lord. However you need to go about that, that should become your top priority as a parent. A large part of our problem today is that folks don't have that outlook on life. 50 years ago, if you ran into a random American family, how many children would they probably have? Now, statistically, you might not be able to give a number, but is it more than people have today? Well, yeah, because that was the whole point of life 50 years ago. Get married and have children, have a family, have a house with a white picket fence and a job. Not be a CEO and make $5 million a year, but just to have a job, have a life. 50 years ago, it was much more like, and I'm not saying everything was perfect in this country, I'm just saying there are norms. We all know what norms are, social norms, and those norms have changed, and they haven't changed for the better in most cases of our culture. And this is one of the norms that has come upon us because people have less of a view towards God, less of a spiritual religious perspective, less of a sense of respect for human life across the board. I don't know what the answer is to all of this, but I know the only hope for the world is the same thing that's always been the only hope for the world, and that is the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The world is a mess. Dayton and then Don.
I think it might be good for us to know God's answer for it.
We're getting to that.
Lamentations 4 and verse 9. Better are those slain with the sword than those slain with hunger, for they pine away, being stricken for lack of the fruits of the field. The hands of compassionate women boil their own children. They became food for them because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. God stated that they would, and they did, eat their own children out of starvation. Back in Deuteronomy 29 or 28, verse 53 and 55, God, in pronouncing the curses upon them, said, "Then you shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and your daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you." Now, if it seems like you couldn't dare get that hungry, God said it's going to happen. Lamentation said it did happen. And in that atmosphere, what had brought this on was the fact they had been offering their children to Molech and to false gods. Life has become very, very cheap, and we're definitely moving in that direction. And here is what God imposed upon them, warning them, of course, but then they fulfilled the warning with the wretchedness of hunger.
That was fulfilled when Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem. It was fulfilled again when the Roman armies with Titus surrounded Jerusalem, and Josephus writes about that, Jewish mothers eating their own children. Molech, Dayton mentioned Molech. How many of you are familiar with Molech? Molech was an idol god, one of the idol gods that the Israelites came to worship. Images of Molech were built out of metal, and they were large enough that you could build a fire in the back of it, and when you built the fire to a raging level where it got the whole idol red hot, around front were the outstretched arms of Molech, and they would throw a baby on those red hot outstretched arms. When they did that, the priests and servants would wail and beat drums so that nobody could hear the screams of the baby as it was being roasted alive. Now, we read about that today, and what do we think about people that worship Molech? They're just horrid, barbarous, godless people. What if they offered up every single day 1,915 babies to Molech? What would we think about them? I think, man, those people deserve to be overrun. They deserve to be slaughtered. They deserve Nebuchadnezzar to come on them. They deserve Titus to come on them, which is exactly what God did with them. But 1,915 statistically is how many babies are killed through abortion in this country every day. It sounds like an unbelievable number. You go home and do your own research. Pull up your computer and see what you can find. Don and then Alan.
My dad, 8 boys, and there would have been 10 except another boy and a little girl died at about 1 year old at the age of 10. And also in the Bible, it talks about a rich man coming up on a newborn baby girl who still had a univocal cord attached, and he raised that, and she turned out to be promiscuous. And basically it was talking about this is what Israel has become. And but back then they would actually take the baby out if it's deformed or wrong sex, take it out in the woods, and I guess they thought had it back because the wild animals back then kill it, eat it, devour it.
Even the Romans did it. The Romans were supposed to be civilized. Alan?
Get to it, but on the news this last week, they talked about an abortion clinic opening up in Oklahoma City. I think it's either the only one in Oklahoma City or the state. I'm thinking the state. But they had a news story just this last week.
I hadn't heard that. I need to watch more TV.
Down on either South Walker or Southwest or 2,500 blocks, somewhere thereabouts.
And that's another thing about abortion clinics. Where are they normally placed? In poorer neighborhoods. You won't see an abortion clinic in Nichols Hills. It's horrendous. And that sounds like a joke, but that's a legitimate part of the whole situation. Right.
Complaining about the fact that they're killing babies, that's not a legitimate
One lady
complaint.
they interviewed did kind of mention as a side effect that she had some more objections to it. Kind of a side note on her part.
Biology. I wanted to throw this in. Conception takes place when a human sperm fertilizes a human egg. So what starts at conception? What do you call that? That's life. That's life. If the sperm is human and the egg is human, what kind of life is it? You can't get around it. That's human life. And it is sacred. That's true. When does God put a soul into a person? The word zoe means life in the Greek. Suke is the word for soul. Pneuma is the word for spirit, but they're all tied together. You can't have one without the other. You can't have a soul without life. You can't have life without a soul, humanly speaking. There's nothing in the Bible that tells us exactly when God puts a soul into a person. There are some passages we'll look at in a minute that give us some idea, however. In a minute, less than a minute. Exodus 20:13. You can go there, you can look at it. I would not discourage you from going there and looking at it, but what do you believe might be in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13? 10 Commandments. fresh off Mount Sinai. What's this one going to be about? Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder. Psalm 139, 13 to 16. Now, from what we have read already, and just common sense, logic, and reason, in my estimation, if somebody is past the point where they will believe that all of this is okay, all this is fine to do to a baby just because it's not yet born, I don't know that Scripture will reach them. If their ability to reason is so far beyond the point where they have no value for that human life, I don't know that Scripture will reach them. But I believe we need to know at least these few passages that deal specifically with human life and the taking of it. Psalm 139, verse 13, you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me when none of them had even come about, when there was not yet one of them. I think that gives us a clue as to when God has a soul ready for a body. I don't know, and I know this is poetry, but there is truth to all this poetry, and David is saying that before I was even born, you had my days all written out. There's a plan in God's mind for every human being conceived. I have to believe that. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. Yes?
I think it might be good, since you just read that passage, to note that this word, unformed substance, the word for substance there is golem, G-O-L-E-M, and it means something rolled together, hence rude and unformed matter, not yet wrought, the parts of which are not yet unfolded and developed. And yet, he is referring to himself as a person
Right.
at that point. And this just highlights what unformed substance is, because they know now about when the fingers appear and the toes and all, and this would be clearer than that. And he still refers to himself as being known of God as a person at that point.
Even when he's unformed. That word you bring up, golem, is very interesting. If you look at the history of the Jews around World War II, there was a creature that they had in their legends and mythology called the golem. And I'm sure it comes from this word because that's what he was described as, an unformed being. It's just interesting that that golem was featured in their legends and their mythology, not biblical stuff. This is extra biblical. But he was very much alive. And even the word in this context is representing someone who was very much alive. Proverbs 6, verses 16 to 19. There are 6 things which the Lord hates, yet 7 which are an abomination to him. And in my estimation, when God inspires a man to write down, I want you to write down 7 things that I specifically hate, we would do well to pay attention to those 7 things. First of all, haughty eyes and a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. Boom, right there it is. What blood is more innocent than an unborn child? Now, I'll tell you what you could do if you wanted to get the whole country mad at you and be clamoring for your lynching. You get a video and you do to the unborn puppies in a dog's belly what people are doing to human beings. You do that, and there would be such an uprising in this nation. It would be everybody's talk if you did that to a dog or any animal, for that matter. I saw...
Well, they would argue that that dog doesn't have a choice
Oh, okay.
in that case as the adult.
Well, maybe it was
But you're right, I agree with that.
Poor dog
It would be
from that
shock
neighborhood.
upon shock. Yeah.
Maybe the daddy dog had run off. There was a guy today, he was interviewing people, getting their opinions about what they think should happen to Donald Trump's children because they had gone to Africa and shot a triceratops. And y'all know what a triceratops is, don't you? And he interviewed several people. Oh, that's horrible. Well, they ought to be arrested. He shouldn't be allowed to run for president. If his children are over there killing a triceratops, well, those are on the endangered list, aren't they? Well, after he interviewed about half a dozen of those, he changed it to saber-toothed tiger. And it was the same thing. Wow, you got to be kidding me. Wow, we can't have a president whose children kill saber-toothed tigers. It was... People were upset about... Yeah, exactly. Oh, boy. Jeremiah 1:5. Dayton read from Lamentations just a little bit ago, and Jeremiah is the one who wrote Lamentations. And it was a lament over Israel, and you can imagine how perfectly contextual those remarks were about a woman of Jerusalem eating her children. Women of Jerusalem, I should say, more than one. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, God talking to Jeremiah says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations." Now, obviously, this is said specifically to Jeremiah about the work that God had planned for him to do. But do you believe that Jeremiah's conception and his personhood began any differently than the rest of us? I don't have any reason to believe that Jeremiah's conception and beginning as a person had any less quality than the rest of ours did. I don't think God just has random people appearing. He knows each one of us. And he knows us before we're born. I believe that's what these scriptures are teaching us. Luke chapter 1. And I just put together a few of these passages because I thought by this point we would be running out of time. Luke chapter 1, you know who Mary is. Mary is mother of Jesus. Were you aware that John the Baptist's mom and Mary were related? John the Baptist was a cousin of Jesus. How much time transpired after Elizabeth became pregnant with John, who would become John the Baptist, until the time that Mary became pregnant with Jesus? 6 months. 6 months. So John is 6 months in the womb when Elizabeth, or Mary, goes to visit with Elizabeth. Look in verse 36, Luke chapter 1, verse 36. I didn't include 36 in the reference, but you can make a note of it. "Behold, even your relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age. She who was called barren is now in her 6th month. 6th month. Nothing will be impossible with God." Mary said, "Behold, the bondslave of the Lord, may it be done according to me, according to your word." And the angel departed from her. At this time Mary rose and went in a hurry to the hill country, to the city of Judah, entered the house of Zacharias and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, what happened? The 6-month-old baby, 6 months old from conception, that means how long from birth? 3 months from birth, normal gestation period. That little 6-month-old, of course it was just a fetus, it wasn't a real person. You know I'm talking facetiously. Leaped in Mary's womb. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. She cried out with a loud voice and said, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. How has it happened to me that the mother of my Lord would come to me?" Remember, this is Elizabeth. She's 6 months pregnant with little John, who would become John the Baptist. And Elizabeth is an old lady. She's way past childbearing age, but God gave her John in her old age, and she's extolling the Lord at this point. She says in verse 43, "How has it happened to me that the mother of my Lord would come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the fetus leaped in my womb for joy." Now the English word is baby, and there would be argument over the Greek word, the Hebrew words, the Latin words, all the words that represent children. But what we're being told in the context, forget the wording, in the context, we're being told that this 6-month-old human being responded to being in the presence of the Son of God even 3 months before it was born. How can it not be a person? That would be my question for those who would argue against it. At any rate, these are just some things we're looking at tonight. Any points of discussion? Don? Yeah, it's going to be good.
I'm not trying to be older than now, or I'm not trying to be, when I do anything before God, even if I doubt it myself, I better confess it as a possibility. And I could have studied this deeper a few years ago, even with my wife, but recently I haven't. Most of us think it's okay to be on the field, but what I've studied lately, yes, it's supposed to stop ovulation. It doesn't always do that. Sometimes it stops the egg from doing what it's supposed to do, so the sperm can penetrate. Other times, it just creates a line too thin to attach. It takes 5 to 7 days after fertilization to attach. So this is why some people become pregnant being on it full time. Sometimes you can be as late as 12 hours, some women later take it within 12 hours, and they'll still get pregnant. So that said, some women maybe even getting their eggs fertilized, being on the pill perfectly, and really it becomes an abortive pill rather than contraceptive. I'm not saying that you should not do it, that it's a sin as the Catholics would. I don't think we can judge each other. All I can only say for me is that when I was thinking about it, even while Kelly was taking the pill, I thought about it, but I didn't really want to study it hard. I even came to God with that and said, I don't know what,